Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Avero Advisors live stream where we come to you with all things digital transformation in the public sector. I'm Megan Seaton. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Growth here at Avero, and I'm super excited today to have with me a face that you all have not seen before, Mr. Brian LaCaruba, who is a Senior Project Manager at Avero, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to all things project delivery. So, Brian, good morning. If you would just introduce yourself to our viewers since this is your first time on the stream.
Good morning, Megan. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk with everyone today about our topic. But just to give a little bit about me, as Megan said, Brian LaCaruba, Senior Project Manager with Avero. I have a background kind of mixed between consulting over the last few years, doing a lot of ERP assessment, selection, implementation support, both in as public sector as well as private sector, with a lot of manufacturers, distribution, construction industry organizations, nonprofits. So really run the gamut around that. And before that, spent a number of years in the retirement services industry and worked just a lot of different projects, whether project managing major implementation efforts, business process improvement of Six Sigma Black Belt, business requirements development, workflow development, QA testing, kind of all of the above for all kinds of software projects. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk with all of you today and hear what you have to say.
Yes, thank you, Brian. We're very excited to dive in. I think this is a great topic, one that's getting a lot of buzz, right? From prospects to our current clients. Should you go all in full ERP or should you do best of breed? And not only that, how do you know which way to go? Right? How do you know what you need and really defining those things up front and what that means? So we're going to get into integration, decision making, all the tech, but more importantly, we're going to talk about our perspective of it being a people first project, right? If you're joining us for the first time today and you're just coming on to the Avero platform, Avero Advisors is a third-party independent consulting firm. We deal only in the public sector, helping them to modernize through business process re-engineering, IT strategic planning, AI readiness assessments, ERP consulting from selection through implementation, and business process re-engineering. If I didn't already the first time, please let us know in the comments where you're joining from. Please ask us questions. We love for these sessions to be interactive, and we want to know what you guys want to hear. We want to know what you're dealing with, right? What are your pain points? Is there anything currently going on in your digital transformation project that you need help with? We're happy to be an agnostic partner and give you that advice. So without further ado, make sure to download our 2025 GovTech report. We are consistently managing and changing that based on industry standards and best practices, but make sure you download that and let us know your thoughts. Let me check the comments really quick, Brian, and see who we have joining. So Mick is joining, and it looks like the Avero Advisors team is in the comments. So again, guys, if you're joining, make sure that you ask questions. We want to hear from you. So Brian, let's jump right in. So first step, I want to talk about framing the ERP project, right? So when a client or a prospect asks which is better, how do you reframe the question?
Megan, it's like with just about all technology questions, it starts as a question about your organization and not about what the technology is that you need. So I'd really want to start from the perspective of what is it that you do really, and not just framing yourself in a very simple, we are a city government, or we're a port, or we provide law enforcement services, whatever that is. You need to really drill that down into much more of what understanding the different functions that you support and what you do to support them, and understanding that guides you towards the meaning of what do you really need from a technology perspective, what do you need from a business process perspective, how do your teams interact. And I can frame this too I have an example from when I worked with a nonprofit client that I think really tees this up nicely, because they were a nonprofit in which there are a small one, about 40 staff, and with that, there are only a handful of ERP systems that are really a great fit for the nonprofit accounting needs, but they also manufactured medical devices, which was a very unusual combo. And they would ship those to developing countries and also train the surgeons and provide support for surgeons on what they were doing. So you look at all that, there's no system that's been built to do exactly what they do. So it was about framing all right, what's really important to us here? So as we looked at we brought in a couple of vendors for demos. We looked at a few others on our short list, but when you frame it as a nonprofit that needs donor management services and CRM, as well as grant accounting and all those types of things, there were some systems that came into play. But then when you look at it from who's really strong in manufacturing and do what you do for medical devices, there were others. So it really came down for them to recognizing that the manufacturing was the core. So that led them to the idea of a best of breed system, because the strong manufacturing systems couldn't support a lot of the nonprofit and donor needs that they had, in which they went with a separate CRM for that. So they could have gone with another system that would have been an ERP that would have done all of it, but wouldn't have done the core components strong enough for what they needed. So it really started from figuring out what was most important to them and what they do.
No, that's a great example of goodness. I just think about the cost savings, right? That's my first thought in all of this, right? If you're not defining what your organization needs up front, how do you know what you need to purchase? And if you're just going at it from a sales pitch perspective, right, from the vendor, and you just go out and spend millions of dollars plus recurring fees in a system that doesn't work for you, what did you really do? Right. So anyway, I'm very passionate about this. You guys see me like warming up over here. I'm so excited for this conversation. So that leads me to my next question, Brian. So how do you, as a project manager, help clients and prospects understand themselves before they go into this project? What are some of the strategies or tactics? What are you doing as a project manager to assist with that?
So there's a lot of components of that. So it happens, first of all, you have throughout levels of the organization. So you need to understand at the executive level, the leadership level, what's important to them, what are the things that they see as where the organization is headed, what are the challenges they're going to face. As you know, with any project, that's the case. But you also need to be talking to the people doing the work, managing the work, and knowing where their challenges are. You see where their challenges are in integration, in particular, in handoffs. That's a big area for me with my background in process. It's always about, it's one thing to look at what's being done within an individual department and where do they have challenges, but looking across, how are they feeding work between each other? How are they communicating? What are the data challenges they have around that? That drives so much of it, because if you end up just kind of replicating that and identifying systems that are going to fit the needs as they are today, that were handoffs built in silos, built to serve individual needs, then you end up kind of reinforcing some of the same problems you have, just with faster technology. So really driving into that view of, at the different levels, but also getting people talking to each other. I usually find when I sit down with groups and get, whether it's cross-functional process mapping or just sitting in discovery sessions or future stage sessions and drilling into getting people talking and learning about parts of the process that they think they don't care about, but that they really do. Where does that information come from? Why is it coming to me in the way that it's coming to me? You end up driving out a lot of knowledge that wasn't there before. And then you may come up with new solutions around what you're looking to do. And all of that is still geared towards what does the business need? And then that drives your view of what the technology should be to support that.
Right. And when we go in and conduct a needs assessment, we've talked a lot about business process mapping, and process re-engineering. In your opinion, Brian, when is that necessary versus maybe not so necessary for organizations to really map out their processes?
Yeah. So there's a realistic view of it and an ideal view. From an ideal view, I'd love to see organizations that have the capacity to have this be a continual part of what they do as an organization. If they're big enough, if they have the staff support to do it, it's going to pay off to be able to have people who can, do that throughout, not just when you're taking on a project, but having an awareness of your processes along the way. But also recognizing, that skill set may not be available. It may not be something that, in the midst of all the other things that are going on, is possible. So I'd also say it's really critical when you embark on a major initiative, and certainly when it comes to an ERP initiative, that's a good place. There can be other initiatives where it makes sense, but focusing on it then to have a handle on what what are your processes? How are they interacting? There are always things that people are learning in those sessions within the organization that are super valuable to them as well as to us when we come in as consultants to support them. So getting an understanding of the initiation of a project, but then also revisiting that throughout as you're doing implementations. As you're at different stages of that, you want to be looking at that. And one thing I often like to do, and this can sequence differently depending on the needs of it, but looking at
Mhm.
that once you've settled on a vendor is a really good time as well, whatever mapping you've done during an assessment and selection, to then also take a look at it. Okay, now that we know the capabilities, we need to look further at how are we going to organize our processes around that. And don't let it be something where it's driven by the vendor's configuration needs. We don't want them giving you a template of saying these are
Right.
the steps you need to configure and just set that up. As first, you want to have a vision of where your process is trying to go and then drive those decisions from there.
Yes, absolutely. So, is an organization ever really ready for ERP overhaul? Define readiness in your terms, and how do we know, right? How do we
Yeah.
know if we're ready? I feel like the answer is no one's ever really quote unquote ready. But ready goes along with what your vision is, right? And your overall strategy for the next 3 to 5 years for your own organization. But Brian, I want your thoughts.
Yeah. It's funny when you asked that, the first thing that came to mind. I don't have kids, but from everyone I know who has kids, no one's ever ready to be a parent, but you try to be
Right.
ready enough, right? So I think of it in the same way is I, there are definitely organizations that are not ready. I've gone to a lot where they have differing views among leadership of what they're trying to do. They don't have the availability of staff and the commitment to push something forward. They don't have an awareness of where they're at from a process standpoint. There are a lot of things that can lead to lack of readiness. And I often get into projects where those are the organizations that are driving ahead the fast and saying, we want this done in X number of months and just get it done. And then you find, okay, we can do that for you, but you have to play your part. And they're often just not in a place to pull the people together to make it happen. So what I look at, though, to assess whether they're ready is kind of the opposite of the things I just said. Do you have a leadership team who understands the need, who is ready to push it forward, is ready to allocate the resources, and then has a champion behind it who has influence in the organization to make it happen? Do you have, if not readily available, at least the ability to pull together a team of people cross-functionally? And that's really important, not just the IT team, but across the business areas, to be able to support a project, to be able to drive out what are their needs, how do they need to, what are the things that are going to be needed to support within each department and function to make it work. So those people are going to need to spend a lot of time. It's going to continue to ramp up as you move forward. So, and they can't be, you don't want to have the people who are maybe least busy because they have just very minimal areas to contribute in the organization. You need the people who have a broad range of knowledge, who are typically the people who are busiest anyway. So being able
Right.
to pull them, and it might mean backfilling. It doesn't. You're not necessarily going to be ready to pull those people right off the bat, but having the ability to pull that group of people in is super critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to the comments. We do
There's a lot of
have questions. Yeah, yeah. Okay, let me scroll. All right. What ERP is best for grants? Clay's asking that questions.
Yeah, and there's a few things there. I tend not to start from the standpoint of a specific system and looking at it for best, because it also comes down to what do you need. So there can be disbursement of grants versus receiving and tracking grants. There's a depth of how much that you need. So I would say I'll dodge a direct answer on that, but give the answer that I think is most helpful, which is understanding, driving into what do you need? Do you need some kind of separate grant platform, again, in the case of maybe dispersing some grants, or is
Mhm.
it that you need really strong fund accounting within your ERP to be able to track those grants and have those components of it? And when you get into that environment, you do need ERPs that have done that before, that have a focus on public sector, know those needs, can deal with things like encumbrances, and can support the different needs around the grant tracking and be very rigorous. You can do it in more of a generalist ERP, but then you end up having a lot to do to support it and to report and to manage. And all the grant reporting requirements are always going to be kind of difficult because they're going to be different. But the more experience the vendors have in that, the stronger it's going to be.
No, thank you, Clay, for that question. So Mick is in the comments and he says, does an all-inclusive ERP system help enforce consistency or does it create rigidity across departments with different needs?
Yeah, and this one will depend a lot on how what those needs are, what the system is. I have seen it both ways. If you can get to a spot of consistency of process, if those processes are ones that align well within a given system, and I think that's really the key point that's going to come out of a lot of this to kind of jump towards the when you answer the question of best of breed versus a monolithic system, it's going to come down to can you get a monolithic system that can really adequately support the needs that you have across the board? Or are you going to end up making trade-offs that you're not willing to support? So if you get into an environment where, say, I don't know, let's just say your scheduling is something that you decide you're going to do that out of your ERP system, have all your departments schedule, but you recognize, like in public sector organization, there's so many different scheduling requirements that trying to do those in a system that doesn't specialize in it, you may put them all in the same system, but then there's going to be all kinds of workarounds that are going to flow downstream that are going to mess up your payroll, and then it's going to become a mess. So if you're not meeting the needs you have adequately, then you're going to run into problems. But that said, you may run into something where, say, you have asset management needs, and those are fairly extensive, but rather than going for a third-party asset management system, that you can get something within an ERP system that's robust enough to support those needs. And it may not be 100% as good as kind of the independent system, but is it 90% there for the core things that you need? And will that be adequate to be able to support you over time and be able to meet those needs and drive you forward? So,
Right. What is going to help you become more efficient and help the end users day-to-day processes, right? And there's pros and cons to. So I like that you said it depends, and that's the first time we've said it. We always joke about we're consultants, and that is our answer all the time, and it really does. I mean, Brian said it best. You have to determine what the needs are from every department, from the end user up, right? And if those requirements are not in an all-inclusive ERP system, you're wasting time if you're just implementing and spending the money to then do workarounds, right? So anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I want to get to more of these questions. We have so many. So Mick again asks, how do you guide clients in defining what success actually looks like for an ERP project, especially when they're focused just on the go live milestone? This is a great question, Mick. Thank you.
yeah, I love that. And that is something that is continual reinforcement. It starts up front, getting in on a project from the conception, from when it's the early definition of that project is important to then really have again conversations across all levels, making sure that leadership has a clear direction of what they want, but then also that as you're working with the teams, you're understanding what are the needs that they have, and that information is funneling back up too. They're usually in communication with their teams around things, but you're starting to deal with questions they don't deal with all the time, right? They're thinking of it from the perspective of our technology has gaps and we need to fit those. We have those workarounds, but your solution isn't just get rid of workarounds. That's just a piece of it. It's what are you trying to support? How are you trying to evolve and grow? And what are you trying to be in the future? So facilitating those conversations and making sure there's kind of feedback loops. It really needs to go. You have those discussions with the leadership team. What are you trying to do? You have those discussions with the people doing the work as well, and you're making sure people doing the work are clear on what the impact of what leadership wants is. You also want to make sure that the problems that are being faced on the ground are kind of connected to what that leadership direction is too, because sometimes there is a disconnect on that, and then that definition of success may not align with the reality of what people are experiencing. So just heavy communication.
Yes, absolutely. Envisioning at the top. And that's where it starts, just like Brian said. Thank you, Mick, for your question. Guys, keep the questions coming. I love this. This is great. I want to talk a little bit about strategy over software, Brian. I know that our focus is people over the actual technology, or people first, then technology. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I think of it first from the standpoint of, technology does not solve problems in and of itself. You think of any technology that you use, it's all about knowing what you want to do with that. And then you look across a broad organization with a lot of functions, you can put a tool in front of people, but that tool is being used by people, despite what advances we have in AI, and that there may be things that technology can take away more tasks. That's still not going to do what you need to do as an organization. You're not turning over your work to a piece of tech, no matter how advanced it is. So you have people who are doing the work, who are serving your constituents, who are supporting each other across anything that the organization is doing. So you have to understand, and I'll keep getting back to that point as an organizations continue. You know your organization at a big picture level a lot of ways, but really drilling deeper into knowing what are the needs that they have, and relying on what is it I need my people to do? What do I need to empower them to do? What am I trying to achieve for them? Usually these projects are not about trying to reduce staff. It's not about trying to take work away from people. This is about trying to make people more effective in what they do, and being able to have them spend more of their time solving the issues that they want to be solving, and working together, working with their constituents, providing service. Those are really the goals of what you're trying to do. And that's done by people who have access to good tools, rather than being done just by technology in a vacuum.
Right. So who needs to be a part of the decision-making process? Are there people that often get overlooked when we're talking about ERP or digital transformation as a whole?
Yeah, I'd say there's a blend here between the importance of engaging a wide group to have influence and input into it, versus being focused on who is actually making decisions around it, right? So as
Mhm.
far as input goes, that should be a pretty wide net, that you are working across departments, you're working across levels, gathering that input, giving them a say in the process in various ways, whether that's defining pain points and challenges, whether that's feeding in business requirements, whether that's watching demos and providing feedback on what they saw and how that's going to affect them. But you also need to be able to get to a focused group to be able to make those decisions. So getting a group of people who leaders who command respect across the organization, who listen to their people, who are going to understand what the needs are that they need to support, but are also able to connect that to the vision of where they're trying to go. So it's going to vary in every organization based on the size, but it needs to have representation across functions, and be pulling in input from different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. So, should organizations be leaning on their peers or their neighboring communities to define what they need from an ERP system as a whole?
There's a lot of value in getting input from your peers, knowing the caveat to that is making sure you're clear on defining and understanding what are the things we can take away that are similar from them, and what are the things that are different. So what you don't want to do is, and I've seen this a number of times, of just going out and saying, oh, these people say this system is great, they're pretty much like us, we want to go with that.
Mhm.
There's a lot more due diligence you need to do in the process than that. Now that input is valuable, and you want to understand, why do they think it's great? What does it support for them? What are the challenges they have? Drill into those types of things. So it's super valuable to be able to learn those lessons and to hear what they've experienced. But you need to, going back to what we started talking about at the top, understanding what is it you do? How is it different from what others do? What does it need to support for us, and where is it going? And then you can take that input from others to feed into this. If they say, oh, we had a great experience with this system, that's valuable, what that was. But if they say they had a terrible experience, it might also be they just had a poor implementation that wasn't well defined, that they weren't supporting. There's a number of things that can go into that. So peer
Yeah.
input is valuable, and you want to bring that in wherever you can, but you also don't want to over rely.
That's right. That's right. What worked well, what didn't, right? And maybe saving your peers from some of those mistakes that your organization made,
Mhm.
right? We've told this story before, but this comes into play a little bit in business development, because we have organizations who issue RFPs that have been copied from other entities, right?
Mhm.
And when you get into that, The software providers, they have seen these RFPs that have been copied, right? And so sometimes they think that, and they know who has won. And so sometimes they think that RFP is written for that ERP vendor, right? So they
Right.
won't respond. We had an organization that only got 2 responses because they copy and pasted an RFP from a neighboring community, in which the vendor community thought that it was written for that vendor that the neighboring community went with. So
Mhm.
I think it is important, again, going back to defining what you want this new ERP system to do for you, defining your own vision and defining the requirements around that, so that you do get good responses. And if you need help with that, call me. We can definitely help with that. So Eric is joining today from UKG. Hey, Eric. Thank you for joining. He and Clay are having a good conversation here in the chat, and I'm scrolling to see where the first you guys are on it today. But Clay, this is the first comment I see. So Clay says, Eric, the shadow systems always get you working with a client right now that's going hybrid. ERP system has an open API and departments with specialized needs got best of breed systems that integrate with it. At least that's what and I can't read the rest. Let's see. At least that's what they propose. I'll report back. And then Eric
Yeah.
says, Clay, thanks. Most ERPs were built as business systems, giving the recruitment, retention, paying in public sector. Business system won't help. People systems with HCM specialization integrated with finance seems to be a logical play. Do you have thoughts on that conversation that's happening? Keep it going,
Yeah,
guys.
and
I
I
love
see
it.
there's another comment from Eric too around the centralized decision making. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a great point, and that also gets into the I didn't talk about as much, but from the standpoint of the different functions that you do, how much of that really needs to connect and automate certain functions. Is I working with a client now that has heavy asset needs. A lot of those asset needs are so tightly tied into the ERP needs and the finance side of it that we have to look really closely about how those play together. Then when we look at the HCM, the HR side of things, there are definitely touch points, but you can look at it from the standpoint of is the value of getting everything into one system, and having those touch points be smoother worth the trade-off, and what might be that system is not supporting your needs as important because your people, outside of what we've talked about from a project perspective, your people from an organizational standpoint are so critical. So if what you really have is certain expectations around how you're doing performance management, how you're doing recruiting, what obviously there's payroll needs that are very heavy and administrative that you need to support as well. Those having something that is really robust and is going to help you excel in those areas and supporting your people is often going to be more important than just saying, okay, we need to have these systems connected because we need to create journal entries out of our payroll and because we need to have people's skill sets kind of connected to things operationally. You can deal with those with integrations without a big trade-off in terms of your overall efficiency as an organization. So it is fitting into understanding, how important is it to get everything under one roof, so to speak. And even if you get into having systems that are provided by the same vendor, that doesn't mean they're going to be well integrated either. They could be acquisitions that have been kind of bolted on that weren't built to play together. I think a really important point I want to make here too is integration is never about just asking, can you integrate with this system? I mean, open APIs are important and the ability to integrate is important, but if you're looking for pre-built integrations that have been done before, if you're looking for data models that align and that are going to be able to support each other, you need to drill into that a little more depth when you get to the point of actually making a decision, in particular writing a statement of work around what the vendor is going to do and what your system's going to do. Because I've seen cases, I was involved in the past in an expert witness case where I was supporting the development of a report on it, and one of the big things hinged on how the kind of customer data was integrating across the system. And they had some pre-built integrations on it that they pitched, and it basically was like 2 data points as opposed to the much more robust level of integration that was needed to support it. So understanding, you need to understand the technical capability around integration, but even more important, again, on this theme, you need to understand what it is you're trying to achieve with it and how are you going to get there.
Right. No, I love that. Like I said, guys, keep the conversations going in the comments. We love that. We love it when you all interact with us and ask us questions. So, Brian, as you were talking, I was thinking about, the role of IT, right? The IT department, IT
Mhm.
director. In your opinion, what is their role and how often should they be involved in these types of decisions?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because a lot of the time can get into scenarios where IT is completely driving it, and we have to emphasize the need that like the business needs to engage. But we
Mm,
also want to make sure it is not sidelining IT as part of that process either. They're a huge part of it. So it's finding that right balance. Cross-functional means IT is a partner in all of this, as they should be in your organization in general. But that's a whole different topic too, right? But when we look at an ERP project, um, IT is going to give a lot of support in areas that only IT can. Someone else had a question on cybersecurity we may not be able to get to in depth, but from the standpoint
yeah.
of uh, just if you love something, but your IT is making an assessment and owning that, like, yeah, it is not secure enough for our needs and what we're trying to do in this area, and they can't get there, like that's a major red flag that you have to address.
Mhm.
But you also just have the nuts and bolts of how are you going to support this on a regular basis. What does your IT staffing look like? If you do have integrations in place, how are you going to maintain those? What's going to happen when there are upgrades pushed? Are those integrations maintained because they're built into the systems? Are the ones that you're going to have to continually test? What is your process like to track those, to test those, to ensure they're working, and then to communicate around it, building that communication
That's
between
right.
IT and your other teams. All of these components. IT's also going to have a lot of knowledge on business processes, on things that people are doing to work around. So you want to have them in those conversations as well, and make sure their inputs being factored in on how they're supporting on a day-to-day basis, what kind of things are driving that. So IT and business should really be working closely together. That's for me. That's really a big focus of really everything I've been doing over the last 20 years is connecting business
Yeah.
and IT teams to function effectively together and to communicate.
No, it is really key because IT is, like you said, taking care of all the infrastructure needs, right?
Mhm.
They're actually integrating this software into your organization. They may or may not understand what other, departments go through on a daily basis,
Mhm.
and that's okay. That's where we come in. We can help, break down those silos, but they are key. Especially, I know you brought up cybersecurity, and Corey, thank you for asking that question because I don't think it's something that we've touched on in a while. But cybersecurity is key when you're thinking about modernizing, right? You need to know how your data is shared,
Mhm.
because you do have some personal identifying information within your organization in any city or county that doesn't need to be put out into the world. So, Brian, talk a little bit about that. How do we ensure, how do entities ensure that they are cyber secure when they're talking about these things, and when they're in the nuts and bolts of the implementation? How do we know? How do we assess?
Yeah, yeah, and I also want to address, Corey's direct question on that, which I would say is
Yeah,
just, what's the most important piece of advice is to own it yourself. Like you can have vendors who are very strong in this, but you cannot simply just say, okay, we're outsourcing and trusting that you're going to keep things secure for
right.
us. You need to
Mm.
own it. You're the ones on the hook. And I know in the public sector, there's so much focus on this. There's so many attacks happening on an ongoing basis. We see
Oh yeah.
IT departments really putting a lot of emphasis there and being effective in that, understanding having your own questionnaires and assessments around what you're looking for from your vendors around it. So uh, being really deeply tied to that. And, I'll admit as we get into like the real depths of what you're looking for and specifics on the technology to be secure, that's a little
Mhm.
beyond my chops as far as specifics there. But definitely, it can speak to the need to have that expertise of people who are
Mhm.
aware of the different weak points and where attacks are coming from and where you're likely to be attacked and what are the things you're doing to secure that, where are the touch points you have across your different systems, owning all of those things. And that's really key. You just have to, there has to be a process that you're communicating those things. You can't have it's someone else talked about shadow IT in the chat, shadow systems that are just being created and not supported through the enterprise because of the potential weaknesses they can have. So
Yeah.
really just making sure that you have a process and control and ownership of that internally, that you are vetting those things and following your guidance on what you need to do internally.
Absolutely. And part of that process should be asking the right questions to your IT department, which a lot of times a city manager or an HR director, maybe they don't know what questions they should be asking their IT teams. And if you don't know, we do have a lot of content on questions to ask your CIO. So make sure that you go out, small plug. See how I did that? Small plug, go out to our YouTube channel and I'll try to go back in and share it in the comments. But Brian is right. Open communication is key in making sure that everyone is on the same page, right? You need to know how IT is working to protect your constituents' data. So more on that, Brian. Maybe we can do another live on that topic alone. I know we've been talking for 35 minutes. It feels like 5. I want to dive into some client stories. I know you have a wealth of experience and you've already told us about the nonprofit, but can you dive into more of the case studies around what we're talking about and what your experience has been personally with those?
Sure. So I'll talk about one that was a city government that I worked with from assessment selection through implementation. And that implementation ended up being it was both finance and HR, and then also incorporated a permitting and licensing system over time. But just to step back in a little context, as a city government, there are a lot of commonalities across city government. So when we get into this, it can be a degree of, oh yeah, we can just do what our neighboring cities did. This organization did a good job of, they were getting that input. We had one of our project team had just done an implementation of an ERP system in another city. He was the project manager there, and he came over and supported the team. But no one came into this with the expectation of, we need to, follow along with anyone else is doing, or go with this system. But, we really were looking at it from the standpoint of focus on finance and HR. We got into the discussion around the asset management side of it and determined, they had a standalone system for that was doing what they needed, and that the touch points on the asset management weren't so sufficient. They really wanted to bog this project down with doing anything there. So kind of left that part out of it. We got into a lot around, of course, the scheduling component. So police and fire with their very specific scheduling needs and everything that was impacting on payroll and what their bargaining groups had agreed to were things that were not going to be supported directly within the system, or at least wasn't a core requirement. They did have a scheduling system in the ERP that we selected. So, we took a look at it, but that's an area too. We said this isn't going to drive the decision, because they can use the scheduling systems that they have and those can be effective. But if we can move to it, that'll be a benefit. So that is one piece of it too, of assessing what should be really critical in making the decision versus what things can be deferred to a later point in the sequencing and determine. They also had, they had Parks and Rec staff instructors who might come in and just do a class once a week for a period of months or something and be off. So you have to figure out what is the need to be able to support them. They're not really on your organizational systems. They just need to be able to kind of track their time, right? But then I think where that one really got interesting was in the permitting and licensing component of things, which this was unfortunate, because what ended up happening, we were contracted to do the assessment on the finance and HR, and we did that, and they used a different third party to negotiate the contract, and then the development director had decided ultimately that he wanted to. He had some conversations with the salesperson, and they went ahead and added in at the last minute the permitting and licensing system that the same vendor was offering. That was one that they had purchased but hadn't really integrated well. They hadn't gone through the whole assessment process and vetted the needs around that. So that decision came to this vendor is going to give us good pricing and they're telling us it can do what we need. So let's just put it in there as well and make it one system. And that was a miserable failure. It did not meet their needs. We figured that out pretty quickly into it. There were a lot of problems that came from just this idea of, okay, we can just go with this same vendor and it'll be fine. It'll meet what we need. We've gotten enough assurances. You have to evaluate it. You have to go through the depth of process of taking a look at what do you need before you just go ahead and select a system. So in that one, it's a good example of, this is not a decision of do you get an ERP or a best of breed. It's a decision of what do we need, and then you can make that decision from there.
I have a question just from your story in terms of vendor demonstrations. So it sounds like, did this vendor do a demonstration, or did they just decide, hey, because we already have them for finance and HR, we're just going to use them for permitting too?
They did not do a demo. They might have done one of the little vendor spends half an hour running you through their marketing materials.
Right. And this
but
system
there was not
can
a formal
change
demo.
colors and yeah. So talk a little bit about that, Brian. Like, how important are vendor demos, and not just vendor demos, but how you script those demos and making sure that you have a plan before you get on a vendor demo.
Yeah, and that's critical. I mean, we can, we at Avero and our team have a lot of knowledge of the systems, but even we can't tell you, hey, this system is going to do everything you need, is going to do it
Right.
well, even once we've learned all of those needs. What we can do, and what you need to do is to define out a script of what does this demo need to do for us? Because if you just give vendors free reign to do a demo, they're going to show you the things they do best in a controlled environment that supports the way they want to frame it. And you're going to be left to kind of draw some connections and say, okay, how does that fit what we do? Well, it looks good. It's, the system's easy to use. You can get caught up in the user interface and how clean it looks when they're doing things, or how few clicks they do it in the very scripted scenarios they do,
Right.
or very specific ones they have. You need to drive for them. What does our organization need? What does that need to look like in a demo? And how do we put those pieces together and show kind of a day in the life and be able to show that flow of information? How is it going to affect the different teams? And you need to challenge them. But that said, the demo is also not building your entire environment. So there are things you're still not going to learn directly from the demo. You're not going to see how, when you do get into this case of integrations, how those integrations play together, because those are things that need to be built specific to you. There are things they can do in the demo to configure the environment and to make it look like yours to a degree, but it's not going to be everything, but it's going to give you a much clearer picture. It's going to bring things to life. It's going to really drive out the further conversations that you need to have around where may there be gaps, where there may be things you need to look at changing your process, because now that you've seen it done a different way, that
Right.
and that can be an area where you might be discounting a vendor because they say, oh, we don't do this exactly the way you want us to do it, but then they show you the way that they do it and it solves the same goal, maybe even in a better way than you're doing today. And it can open up an organization's eyes to a new way of doing things. So just being able to really clearly lay out what are the outcomes you're looking for, how do you get those in a demo,
Mhm.
is a key step in being able to get the right decision.
Yes, absolutely. I could not agree more. I know we're going on 41 minutes. This is crazy. So I want to dive in a little bit because I had Robert, who is our vice president of client services. So um, we were talking about the word ERP and how it's become such a buzzword that a lot of the people we're talking to and we're having conversations with just don't know what it means. You go into an organization and you say the three letters ERP, some people think that it's just, their financial system. Some people think it's HR, some people think it's asset management. And the reality of it is, yes, all of those things are considered enterprise resource platform, right? But how do you define, which is what this whole conversation is about, how do you define what you need? Do I just need to replace my financial system? Do I just need to replace my HR system? If what do I need to do? How do you define what ERP means to my organization, right? Or to your
Yeah.
organization?
Yeah, and that's a key question to ask. And I think, one of the things, just to step back a second too, I think we get into this language of saying a single system a lot of the times. And I always
Yes.
view that as it's not reality, because there are always things that are branching off of that, unless you're a really tiny organization. But even then, there's other components of it. I mentioned my big part of my early career was in retirement service industry. Our retirement record keeping platform had an IT team of 200 or 300 people to support, and then we had SAP with a much smaller team proportionally of 20 or so folks. So even where you have a big ERP
Yeah,
that has a lot of needs, like that can be very secondary to other things you're doing as an organization. But obviously, you need to scope it out within an ERP project of
sure.
what does it mean to you. So I would say in the assessment phase, it's really important, and there can be circumstances where you can bypass this, but to include all the major touch points in the discussion. You should
Mhm.
understand what you need from an HR perspective. You should understand what you need, whether it's scheduling your payroll. You should understand whether it's assets, if you have property management, if you have jail management system, whatever. Like anything that you need to support public housing, like take a look at those things and understand where you're at with them. If you've done that very recently for some reason, you may be able to leverage what you've done, but you really need to at least incorporate it, if for nothing else than for the standpoint of making sure you know what those touch points are going to be. But it's only in gathering that knowledge. And again, I'm working with a client right now we started with an expectation that what was deemed their project management system was going to be out of scope. And then as we got into some other discussions, realized maybe it's not doing as much project management, it's more portfolio management. And there's all these potential touch points where that may need to interact. So let's take a look at that. And maybe that we're not going to decide to replace it, but you do need to know where it stands and at least what are those gaps and how it's connecting to everything else and how is it impacting the organization as a whole, because you don't want to just take the word of the people doing a function without recognizing the handoffs and the touch points of where it's impacting other processes.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you. I do think that we get in the habit of thinking that ERP means all inclusive, right? And that's not the case. I love that answer. Thank you, Brian. I want to get to one more question in the chat that I see from Eric, because I think it's a good question. Do you find the, let's say, more seasoned CIOs, CFOs, and CHROs to lean to a single system plays versus more progressive leadership thinking another way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think some of it too is what have they gathered from their experiences in the past and kind of what are their strengths. So I would say you can have someone who may be really strong in one of those functions, but may not have as broad a view of some of the connections of how that technology is going to interact elsewhere. So you may get into it can vary a lot, and I guess I'm hemming on this question a little bit. So I would frame it more as the they're going to be really tuned in. You want to see someone who's tuned into what their needs are and that they're driving and looking for those, but that they're also able to look at it outside of that lens of just how it's affecting what's under their span of control. And if you're in an executive level, hopefully you've been getting to that point because you're able to kind of look across the organization, but that's certainly not always the case. So having that ability for them to be able to balance those needs of, yes, these are the things I'm trying to do with my function, but this is also how it's supporting across the organization. So if you look at the HR environment, there's a ton of things that you need to support from an HR perspective and how you're managing your people that are really driven out of kind of business decisions around that. And that you're going to be looking towards the technology to be able to support a lot of that, but you also then need to have that view into working with your business partners and what do they need as well. So I think you can see a lot of variety in that, and that can be where we'll sometimes see people dig in their heels when we get into it as well, of what their expectation is, or they may have a certain system they're leaning towards because they've used it at their last 3 jobs and they think it's great. And it may be great, but it may not be what they need as a whole.
Yes, I think where this question may be coming from, Eric, and correct me if I'm wrong. We've had a lot of discussions with UKG, and we've had them on our live stream. So please make sure you go out and check that out. I think it was a great conversation. But sometimes, I guess from their perspective, they see that the CHRO doesn't have a seat at the table necessarily when it comes to ERP overhauls, because typically, finance leads the way, right? Or, that finance is implemented first or whatever the case may be, right? Sometimes the CHRO doesn't have a seat at the table or a voice, or, they get trumped by, and I'm echoing, sorry guys, by, the financial piece, and they're just going to go all inclusive. So I think that's where that question is coming from. So I guess my question, Brian, to further this conversation is, how do you ensure that every department has a seat at the table, and how do you, come to a conclusion, or how do we help people come to a conclusion that where everybody's happy?
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell a story on that too, as well, with the city government implementation of where, we had a steering committee that was in place for a couple of years as that project was moving along. It was going great. We had finance, HR, and IT all represented in that. And the finance director left as we were getting near the end of the finance implementation, but before the HR implementation was still a few months away. And of course, they appointed an interim finance director, but there was a lot of discussion around who should be the new project sponsor. And I said, well, it should be the HR director. And there was a lot of surprise among people. It's like, well, finance has to lead this. And it's like, well,
Right.
Do they? This HR director, he's done ERP implementations before. He understands what's happening with finance. HR is a big player in this. Why should it not be him rather than your interim finance person or someone who just doesn't have that level of authority? So he ended up being the right person to become the executive sponsor upon the departure of that person. So I would say some of it is to let go of some of the expectations around this needs to be done a certain way. It's looking at again, those broad conversations, the bringing in, and this is where, we talked about readiness before. If you have an executive team that's used to sidelining certain teams, you may not be in a spot where you're going to be really ready for this to happen unless you can get more inclusive around how that's happening. You need, even as we come in as consultants, there's only so much we can do in order to be able to engage. We can certainly meet with people, we can gather feedback, but if as an organization, what you do, and we can advise on how you do decision making and how you bring people in, but there still needs to be processes where they're gonna listen and incorporate those people at the table. So it's an important thing to have that openness to recognizing, who do need to be the players here. Let me not just stick to some preconceived notion of who matters in this organization.
Right. No, that's a great perspective. And Brian, I know that your time is so precious. And guys, I keep going back to, oh my gosh, we've talked for 50 minutes, but it's been so easy to talk to Brian, to chat about all things, ERP versus best of breed. And I think he had some good, what I call nuggies to share with all of our viewers. And we have some great content. So thank you, Brian, for your time today. We are extremely grateful to have you on the Avero Advisors team. And I think you guys will be seeing a lot more of Brian because he's really good at this and he makes this very easy for someone like me. So thank you again, Brian. Before we wrap up today, are there any closing thoughts that you would like to share?
Well, first say thanks, Megan, for having me on. I'm really excited that I've joined the Avero team as well. And I want to appreciate all the engagement in the chat. I know we didn't even get to everything in here, but I tried to pepper in some at least brief comments around questions we didn't address. So, again, back to what I said at the top, always the biggest message is focus on yourself as an organization. Technology decisions drive from an understanding of what you are, who you are, where you're going. And, I do expect to be on more of these, and that'll be a theme in any topic that we're talking about. And it's a big part of what I love about my job is being able to help people through those discussions.
Yes, absolutely. These are not technology projects, they're people projects. And part of the people is visioning and making sure that whatever you're doing, whether it's implementing an ERP system or an AI readiness assessment, that those goals match your overall vision. So thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Again, if you are not following us on social media, we are on every single platform, including Facebook. So please go out, follow us, watch our YouTube channel. We are nerds about all things digital transformation. And if there's something that you want to hear from us, please connect with us. We want to hear from you all. We want to know what you all want to hear from us. So we love to hear from you. We will get to all of your comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Eric. Sorry, I'm trying to read. Thank you. We will come back and we will make sure to comment and answer all of your questions. I'm Megan Seaton. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Growth, and we go live every single Wednesday at 10 a.m. So make sure you tune in. And Brian, thank you. Happy Wednesday.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone.